Welcome to this Poppies panel event, where we're going to be learning how we can talk with children about death. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Poppy, and I founded Poppies 10 years ago. Poppies is an ethical funeral directors in London, and we're on a mission to give people the funeral they want, need, and can feel proud of. In addition to our work with families running funerals at Poppies, we run panel events like these to open up the conversation about death. We're often in our job in the position of thinking creatively with our clients about how to involve children in meaningful rituals around death. And we know how powerful it can be for adults to feel able to talk clearly and compassionately, so children and young people understand what's happening, and so they can feel less anxious about the process. We also know these conversations can feel very difficult to start, and they can also feel scary for adults. We're often thinking, what if I get the conversation wrong? What if I make things worse? And also, how do I feel about death myself? How comfortable am I talking about death? The ambition of this evening is to leave you feeling more confident in starting these conversations with children and young people. And to begin to make that possible, I'm so thrilled to welcome our fabulous panel of experts here tonight. We have Pia and Laura and Danielle. Thank you dearly for being here to share your professional and personal experience. I know we couldn't be in better hands. Thank you also, and welcome to our wonderful audience. Over 290 people signed up for this event tonight, which I think says a lot about how many of us want to feel more comfortable to talk to children about death. A special welcome to those of you from around the world. We have people here from Malaysia and New Zealand and Slovakia and Colombia and many other countries. And also welcome to those joining us from local community organisations, our local hospices, schools and care organisations in the London boroughs and beyond. It's so great to have you here. Promise I'm going to stop talking soon, but a couple of notices before I do. A note to just take care of yourselves tonight. We're expecting this conversation to feel very much like the kind of warm colours that are behind us. It should feel warm and informal, but of course it will evoke emotions. It's going to be emotional. We know that death is something that so many of us don't talk about much, and for some of you this might be a really new experience. You are particularly welcome here. If at any point you feel yourself becoming overwhelmed, just take a break and come back when you're ready. This is being recorded and will be emailed to everybody tomorrow. So if you've missed something, you can always catch up then. In terms of how the evening will run, we're going to start with some questions that you guys have submitted already. And after that, we will move on to live questions. So we'd love you to be asking lots of questions during the session. You can start now. The way you ask the questions is through the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen. So if you type in your question there, and if someone else's question interests you, you can upvote it by clicking on the thumbs up button next to the question. And this will mean that questions that are very popular, people really want answered, will move to the top, and I will be able to make sure those get answered, because we won't be able to answer all the questions. There's too many people here tonight to do that. Please do use the chat to share resources and make comments, but don't put questions in the chat because they will be missed. And similarly, if you raise your hand, that won't be seen either. So the Q&A is where you should put your questions. Okay, now we're ready to get started. I'd love to go to the panel. So Laura, would you be able to start by introducing your wonderful self and letting us know your interest or experience in this area?
Certainly, yes. Hi, thank you for having me. And it's lovely to see how many people are in the chat and where they're all from. It's amazing. So my name is Laura D. Pusey. I am an end-of-life guide. I'm a funeral arranger, funeral celebrant, and I'm also a grief and bereavement counsellor, mentor and coach. Now, I've always been curious about dying and death. But my journey really started around 2015 when my aunt passed away. Ever since then, I've created 2 businesses and I've authored 2 books, one that helps us to plan and prepare for the end of life, and the other one to help us to understand or overstand grief.
Lovely, Laura, thank you. Pia, would you hop on next?
Certainly, and well, thank you very much for having me here today. It's lovely to see such a lively chart popping up on my screen all the time. And yes, my name is Pia. I work for a charity called Child Bereavement UK. Quite simply in our name, and we support children who have somebody died, somebody special who died, and we also support parents who have a child died as well. And the aim is support the family to rebuild the life together. So in terms of supporting children's wise, we help them until up to age of 25. So it's quite not stop at 18 is make us a little bit different. But what I would say is that everybody's different. So in terms of how we support, it will be different. So unfortunately, there's no magic, but it's a journey, and that's how I see it. And for myself, yes, that's kind of my daily job. I do talk about death every single day, including weekends. I quite often need to excuse myself with my family and friends. I'm so sorry, but I do have to mention it. Just come out naturally, because it's just, yeah, that's me. So natural and so used to it now. So yeah, maybe we all just need a little bit of practice, and that become normal. And it's normal in our life as well.
So lovely. Thank you, Pia. And Danielle, how about you?
Yes, I'm Danielle. I am the Widowed Young Support Coordinator at Care for the Family, and we offer support to families in all different areas, primarily as well in bereavement support. And my area is focused primarily on widowed adults, but through that, of course, you have contact with the children. And my own experience would be that I was widowed young myself in 2013 and found myself a single parent with 3 small children and wondering, how in the world do I do this? And having to have those discussions that I didn't want to have with my children. And they were so young. They were 6, 4, and 2. So that's my experience. I've had a lot of bereavement in life. So death was a normal conversation in our house. So that would be my experience.
Thank you all so much. Okay, let's get cracking with some of the questions. So we're going to start with some questions that were submitted ahead of time. So we had a question from Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. How can we start the conversation about death with children before it happens? How can we be proactive about this discussion rather than being forced into a reactive corner when it occurs in our children's lives? Laura, would you be able to kick us off?
Yes, certainly. I think that the hesitation or the reticence sometimes comes from the fact that none of us really know the answers. And so we don't want to make it look as if we don't know the answers to our children, to our young ones, if they are going to ask us a question that might leave us a bit flawed. But I think that the conversation should start well before any actual death occurs. We experience death practically every day. We see the seasons change. We watch food. Well, we don't really watch food perish, but it perishes. Also on television, death is often spoken of and it's often viewed quite freely. So I think that we need to just normalize these conversations of death, take the sting out of it, and see it as a natural transition, because that's what it is, and explain that this is something that happens to everybody. We enjoy our lives to the fullest. We make use of every single day, and then the time will come when we won't be here anymore. But then we can look back over the life that has been lived, and it continues. The joy continues, the love continues. So I really think it's about just having those conversations, normalizing it. This is what I'd like, and this is what happens, and this is what I know. Oh, I don't know the answer to that. Let's go and look. Let's see if we can find out. I think that it's about education and exploration, and having forums like this where we can have open discussions on what actually is death and how do we deal with it. I think it's very important that we include our children in these conversations, because so many adults are suffering from different symptoms and experiences, because back then, when somebody they cared about passed away, they weren't given the voice to speak and express themselves. So I think just normalizing these conversations, keeping them going, and yes, show emotion because it's natural. And our young ones need to see that we actually feel when somebody passes away. Let's not hide it. Let's not have that stiff upper lip. Fine, fine, everything's fine, because we're not fine, and our children actually know it. So
it's gorgeous. Yeah. Laura, you used a word there which I loved, which I wondered if I would sort of back over to Danielle or Pia, that word exploration. I'm thinking, I have 3 young children, and I feel, because of everything that I know, and I know that there will be difficult bereavements in their life, I can't pass a sort of a dead squirrel without taking the opportunity to say, let's go and talk about that. Even watching the leaves fall from the trees. And I wonder if Danielle or Pia, you have any experiences of that, like how we can use the sort of natural world or the things that we see around us to start having conversations before the pressure is on.
No, I think that's actually very important, because we were having conversations like that with ours when they were quite young. I remember we found it was a dead rabbit by the side of the road, and my son had 1,000,001 questions, and he was only 6, and this was actually about a month before his own father would pass away. So having that discussion actually was very helpful for what was coming next that we didn't know was coming. And it was just, what happened? Well, that he was hurt, and he was obviously hit by a car, or, when you have that discussion, you're just using, I think, the everyday. And I think as was already mentioned, it's normalizing it, because it is a part of life, and we can't pretend that it doesn't exist. So I think just taking the everyday little things, or even the events we see on TV, the recent death of the Queen, the COVID pandemic, these were all opportunities to talk to the children, not just about what you see in the natural world, but what's going on in the world around you.
And so often they're teeing us up with their questions, aren't they? It's like we don't even necessarily have to bring it up. Okay, yeah. I'm going to move on to the next question. Marianne asks, how can a parent best support their grieving child when the parent is also grieving? Danielle, I feel like this one is definitely for you.
Yes, I would say that is a very, very difficult road to travel. And that's only because I've traveled it myself. My children were 6, 4, and 2 when my husband was killed in a road accident. And we were suddenly catapulted into this world of grief and this whole world of bereavement and funerals and family and sandwiches everywhere. And it was almost like this surreal moment, like, is this really happening? But I think the most important thing is to be really real. And I think to show your emotions in front of your child, that it's okay, because they're going to watch how you react. Our children watch what we do. They mimic what we do. How I see my little girls when they were smaller, walking around in my shoes. They want to do what mommy was doing. And that's what they do. So they see how we react. So I cried in front of my children. I talked to them if they were sad. Sometimes there was a lot of repetition, and I think being honest with them too, because mommy, you're sad, you're crying. And I'm like, yes, I'm sad, I miss daddy. And I think it's just taking it one day at a time and being real and authentic. So like at night when my 2-year-old was crying because she wanted daddy and didn't understand why he wasn't there, it was difficult. Many times I just sat beside her on her wee bed and I cried with her. Because that's really all I could do. Basically, I'm sorry, honey, but daddy is no longer here. As we talked about, daddy was in an accident, and daddy has died. And kind of, we went and we said goodbye to daddy. Remember, he was in a box, and we went through all that. But it's being as honest and open, real conversation, clear conversation, and not trying to I would say lie to them, but just be as honest as you can, because you want conversations you can build upon. So you give them as age appropriate, but you mimic it and you be real and you walk it with them. And like, we're in this together, guys. So I don't know what I'm doing. You don't know none of us know what we're doing. We're just going to have to do this day by day. And I think it was just talking and keeping those lines of communication open as well, and being sensitive to, they maybe need to talk to somebody that's not me. And who do they go to? So finding those people that are there when they're ready.
Is there, without pushing you, I assume there is also a really important place for you to take care of yourself. Absolutely. You could get consumed with taking care of them and meeting their needs, and actually you have some as well.
It is that idea of self-care, and that was a really hard one for me because I kept wondering, oh, my children come first, my children come first. But it is that really overused analogy of the oxygen mask that they talk about in the airplane, that there's no way you can help the person next to you if yours isn't on, because you're going to pass out. So so it's about having the oxygen on and looking after yourself. And if I needed to talk to somebody there, yeah, I had to do that counseling, and I had to make that, be proactive in that, but it all came down to choices. And my children were my biggest motivation, and I knew that if I couldn't give what I didn't have. So if I wasn't in a good place, I couldn't help them. And so it was kind of there was a joint effort, but there was also a lot of responsibility as me, as the parent, to go, okay, this isn't awful. I'm navigating this day by day, but I need to look after myself so I can help them.
The sense of you guys as a team and you as the leader is really powerful in that. And no doubt that will shape your relationships forever. Okay, we're going to move on. So this is kind of a bit of a bumbling question, just because it came in from so many people in so many forms. I've tried to kind of pull it together. So, and Pia, I'm going to field this one to you, if that's okay. We've had lots of questions from different people, including Isabel, Gloria, and Holly, about preparing children and teens of different ages for specific deaths. But it's hard to provide exact language for each very personal scenario. I'm sure Pia's whole life is, how do I explain this to this person? Could you, Pia, help us think about the sort of broad themes of how we can talk to children, preparing them? And is there any kind of specific, useful, age-appropriate language, just examples that you might help us? I think hearing some really good examples for different ages and stages for a child or a teen might be helpful.
Well, I think, first of all, again, there's no standard answer. We wish the children is born with instruction book, but unfortunately they don't. So going back to actually what Daniel and Laura was said before, honestly, normalizing clear, simple, direct language. So let's say, starting from very young age, if we need to deliver the news, first of all, there's no best time to. And so I was thinking, using the illness as a title, then could say to the young child, our dear granddad died last night. He's been poorly for a long time. He died last night. And then it's important to have the space and time for them to absorb and ask what that means, and maybe give them the chance to ask question if they have question. Potentially, they come back to you a day or two or week or month later with more questions. Depends where they are. And as a parent, I'm sure you know your child better, so you can think about what level of information to give. And for a bit of an older child, maybe just additional information like, our dear granddad died last night, and we know we visited him, and he had cancer, and unfortunately the treatment didn't work well, and the doctor couldn't do anything. So it's the level of information, how much they can understand, how much you want to feed in with them. And of course, for the older age, we could even say leukemia, that would mean something to them. And then depends on how much care or how much visits they were involved in. They knew the process already. And I think it's take it from there. And most importantly, it gives them the time and space to ask questions and feel okay to encourage them to ask questions. Maybe if they may have other trusted individuals to ask, that's also okay as well. But it's giving them time and space to think about and feel okay to come back and ask the question, especially for the younger ones. They would, except for, like, for example, you told them just last month, and Christmas time, would I get another present from granddad? And you realize you need to go through the whole things again. But that's how children learn. They repeat, process, maybe ask again, process a bit. When they're ready, they ask more questions. That means they're ready to receive more information.
And it feels like there's a theme coming through, which I wonder if we'll agree on, which I think it makes me think it's kind on the adult as it is on the child, which is like, if we think of it more like building blocks rather than the pressure of like, I have to give this speech and it has to explain everything and I have to get through it. And I need to be kind of like the God that can answer everything. And it's lovely what I think you're all describing, which is this almost like we can figure out what we want to say as we say it. We can say a piece, the child can go away, they can come back with questions, we say another piece. That feels more gentle on everyone involved.
Yes, I think to add on that is very powerful. It is okay to say, I don't know. And then, or maybe if the person asks the questions when the place in the playground, for example, it's not right to have that conversation. And just acknowledge it. It is a very important question, but we are doing this. We are in the middle of supermarket. Shall we talk about it when we get home?
Which again is I like the way I feel like what you're describing is also kind of compassion for the adult, you know, which is we're not this like Wikipedia site, you know, we are also going through feelings ourselves. And yeah, brilliant, well done. Just as well, do chuck your questions in the Q&A box. I can see there's some there, but we'd really love you to throw all sorts of questions at us, so don't be shy. We will have a go at answering absolutely anything. So please write it down, and don't, if you put it in the last 5 minutes, it definitely won't get answered. So put it in now when there's a good chance. So this is a big question. And Daniel, I'm going to start with you, and then I might ask Laura and Pia to pitch in as well. How can we explain an accidental or violent sudden death to a child? And how can we talk about suicide? And I think suicide is a really important thing to include here, because so often when I'm talking to people about this, you know, there's this response of like, oh, I totally get that you could explain these scenarios, but I can't imagine how I would have the conversation about a sudden traumatic death or suicide. And Daniel, I'd love to hear from you to start with, and then Pia and Laura, maybe you could come in too.
Yes, well, I've had to have both of those conversations with my children. As like I've mentioned, my husband was killed in a road accident, very traumatic, very sudden. And then a young girl who was a babysitter for my children took her own life. And that was in 2016, so it's about 3 years later. So it was her favorite babysitter, and I had to have this conversation that I didn't want to have. And I think, and I mentioned it before, it's about being as honest as you can, but making sure that what you tell them is age appropriate. And you don't have to give them all the details. It's just, you know, when I'm looking at them, they were 2, 4, and 6, and my son had additional needs. So I knew I was going to have to do this very individually and with their own wee personalities. My 2-year-old, I had to repeat this conversation every evening on the stairs. She would sit in front of our door because she knew when mommy started cooking, daddy was coming home. And so every evening for months, she would go and sit on those stairs, and I would have to sit beside her, and we'd have this conversation that daddy wasn't coming home. And I think it was, you know, I said to them, you know, daddy has been in an accident. Daddy was hurt, and daddy is no longer alive. And that means his heart's no longer beating, and they couldn't help daddy. So we're going to have to learn how to say goodbye to daddy, and it's just going to be mommy. And giving them these little details, and then they come with questions, then like you say, answering them as best as you can, age appropriately, but they don't need to know every detail of that age, but just don't lie to them, you know, because you want conversations you can build on. So you've got something you've already started, they'll come back with more questions, and you don't have to backtrack and go, well, actually, I should have said this, because you told them something that you're trying to protect them. But I think they are more resilient than you give them credit for. But at the same time, we need to validate their grief, and we have to answer their questions and let them be children. And children are inquisitive. And I think the suicide question is a very difficult one, because when this young girl took her own life, you know, we were all very surprised. We knew that depression had been there, but we thought it was under control. And I had literally been on the phone with her the night before, because she had a job interview and we were talking about it. So I was stunned the next day, and I had to tell my children, and it was like, well, because they were really surprised, because she had just been with them the week before. I said, well, she's not well. Okay. And I didn't tell them what that meant, but, you know, she had been facing depression. We had that conversation later, but at the time we weren't ready for that. And just, she wasn't well, and it was just really difficult for her, and she just couldn't go anymore. And unfortunately, she's no longer with us. It's just like daddy, we're going to have to go and say goodbye to her. And then stages, they would come and ask questions and I would give them a bit more. And then eventually, you know, we had to have the conversation of, well, how exactly did that happen, Mommy? I know she was sick. Was she in hospital? It's like, no. And then I had to say that she didn't want to live anymore. And she decided that she wanted to die. And, you know, we had that conversation, but it was, I didn't give them too much, how she did it and all that, but that's all they really needed to know at the time, and they were content with it. But I think they know they can come to me and ask, but it is about, you know, listening to them and not trying to dismiss them or play it off, but just be as honest as you can, age appropriate detail, and just so they know that they can ask you, because you don't want to be that person they can't approach. You want to be approachable.
Thank you, Danielle. Those are two very big stories, and I'm really grateful to you for sharing them. Laura and Pia, do you have any bits to add to that, do you think?
Well, I think Danielle has really, you know, put it across in, I don't know, I'm kind of lost for words. What I would say is that it takes a lot for somebody to decide to end their lives. You know, we often think about physical pain. We can identify with physical pain, but we can't always identify as readily with mental or emotional pain. So I think it's a case of explaining that to children, that sometimes, you know, when you get a pinch, it hurts. And sometimes we are pinched in other ways. And that the person that we love and care about, are fond of, has decided that they didn't want to be in pain anymore. So I think that's a way of just kind of explaining it. Now, if it's somebody that's so close to you, you may want to nominate somebody else in the family to talk to the child about that. You know, often we will christen the children or have naming ceremonies. We nominate people that we want to be there to help us to raise our children, and perhaps in our absence. So it's about bringing them in for conversations like this as well. Again, education and preparation. Our language is very important. But just as everybody here has said this evening, it's about little by little, you know, and just keeping those conversations open, keeping it moving. Just to add, my parents had a son before I was born, and I didn't have to know about him. But because he was constantly spoken of, because both of my parents were so familiar with death, it was normalized. And I can't stress enough how important it is that we have these conversations about pain, about emotions, expression, and how normal and necessary it is. Because when grief is trapped within us, it can cause sickness, and we don't want that. So
yeah. Laura, and it speaks to all of my professional experience, the number of times I've been in a room with a family or with a person who has had an experience of not being let in on the secret, or, you know, the information coming up later on, whether that be, as you say, someone who died in the family that they didn't know existed, or whether that be how people died, or inclusion in the funeral. The greatest pain is always the exclusion and the secrets. I think that's so helpful. I want to move now to the questions that the audience have been asking. There are two questions that I'd like to weave together from Alexis and Isabel. Thank you both so much for these questions. Alexis asks, do you have any advice for how to talk to a child about death when the death is of another child? And Isabel's question, which I think is related or could be related, I would like to know how to address and begin this conversation when the death is one of the siblings, which becomes very hard. So it feels to me there's a question here about how we speak to children about the death of other children, and when one of those children might be a sibling. Pia, would you speak to that for us?
Sure. Now, there's a difference between siblings and maybe a classmate. And because, well, first of all, who's involved? Let's say in the school situations, I think that these days the parents are being informed in some way. So it's important to prepare your children. So I think the important is the news come from the person they trust and not from somebody else, because you don't know how it was said. And so either, yes, if it was a classmate or somebody in school, you heard the news and you can have the control environment again. You can choose the language and sit them down and explain to them. Yes, unfortunately, younger person could die as well. And that's so much I know at this moment. And that's why you may not see this person tomorrow, and or maybe because their siblings not around, and they may need to go to a funeral, and that may depends on the situation and how much you know. Or maybe just be prepared. The child, your best friend's sister died, and maybe she got a bit emotional. If you would, it would be so nice if you could just give her a hug or say something, or maybe just be aware. And then if it's happening in the household, and of course, the child may already pick up the emotions from the adults already. And so again, it's important to tell them what has happened, because when things happen or adults try to hide things behind the closed door, children fill the gaps with their imaginations. So unfortunately, either way, it is going back to what we talked about before. Think about the age-appropriate language. Try to break the news yourself. And if you find it very difficult, like Laura said before, find somebody you could trust and maybe they could help you. Or maybe practice with another adult to go through those words before you say it.
Yeah.
Go on, Laura.
I really like the word that Pia used, imagination. I think that if we can work with a child's imagination, then we can accomplish anything. So I'm a hypnotherapist, and often when I've got a client, I'll just ask them, can you just close your eyes, take a deep breath? Let's say it's a child. Where is Johnny? Where is he in your body? Do a scan from head to toe. What color is he? What shape is he? What size is he? Where is he? Is he moving? Is he vibrating? Can you feel him? Is he soft? Texture? Go within and see if they can find their loved one, and just let them know that, okay, this is where they are. You know, I know that some people speak about children having gained their wings. So it might be a nice opportunity for the child to maybe draw a picture of Jane with wings, how she remembers her or him smiling, happy. If it's somebody who was actually in the family and they were sick, I think that it's again a time that we should have the children together, so that we see the process as it's happening. The child that is unwell isn't hidden, because we need to remember as well that we are alive until we die. Until that moment, we're still alive. We can still hear, we can still feel, we still have an awareness. So it really is about involving everybody. This is a community thing, not an isolated thing. And just keep those conversations going. I'm parroting everybody else, but yeah.
But there's two things in my mind listening to you. There's the first thing is just, however, I think you used a phrase when we were having a conversation before, Pia, about our desire to wrap children in cotton wool, which is so natural, but recognizing that when we it's not a lie, is it? When we don't tell the whole truth because we're trying to protect, we are probably causing pain later on. And we will probably have to untangle that web. I mean, this has come up in one of the questions, but I wonder if now's a moment to just touch in on whether you guys have any favorite resources or favorite books that aid any of these kinds of conversations. Do any of you? I've got I think it's called When Someone Dies, is the picture book that I have in my cupboard, and I keep getting it out and lending to people because people die and children have questions. Not to put you on the spot, if you don't have anything to mind, we can always come back to that later, but just if you had a favorite book or a poem or something that you go back to, I'm sure the audience would love to hear it.
There's one that is very good from Winston's Wish, puts it out, and it's Muddles, Puddles, and Sunshine, and it's an activity book. And it's actually very helpful. We talk about children puddle jumping, and they can just jump in and out of their grief. And 1 minute they're fine and they're playing, and the next minute they're sad, and they express that, and that's lovely. We should be more like that. You know, they don't hide their emotions. So that's a really good book. I found that very, very helpful. And then anxiety was a big thing with my girls, because my husband went out the door and he didn't come home. They didn't get to say goodbye, so they were terrified when I would leave the house. So there was a really good book, and I can have it here. It's called, oh, you can't see it with the screen, sorry. The Invisible String, it's called, by Patrice Karst. And it's about how there's this invisible string, and it even goes all the way to heaven. And it's lovely that no matter, even if I'm not in the room, we're connected by love. And it's this invisible string. And my daughters found it very helpful.
We do use those books as well, and I do quite like the Invisible Strings. It's very sweet, warm book. You can still connect it, even though this person no longer in this world. And I think the other book I use quite a lot is The Huge Bag of Worries. Now, when it comes to death, yes, obviously there are books about death and dying, but at the same time, other emotions come through as well, which is worries and all sorts. So that is actually another nice story to share with children, I think.
I wanted to just touch on, because the other side of this, maybe we could just quickly go there, is the wings and the string and heaven and stars, and what muddles can we get ourselves in using analogies that then can confuse children. So one of the things that comes up a lot in my work is like gone to sleep, passed away, when we've lost someone, you know, that these images can be really confusing to children who feel like we've lost grandma, you know, like, where is she? And Pia, I bet you have a lot of opinions about this, and I wonder if you might share them.
Well, I need to bite my tongue on it sometimes. But as a parent, if I would say somebody gone to sleep, I think you could imagine how much trouble you may have afterward. So especially for the younger one, the younger children, they have no filters because, well, they learn the language, very direct words. So actually using the direct word, death, die, helps them to understand what has happened. And it's no other meaning. It cannot be anything else. It's what it is. And of course, for the older one, they know what that means. Then it is a different thing. But usually it causes trouble with the younger one. And of course, if your religions, your family practice that early age, they know what heavens means, then that's a different matter. But still, we would say it's suggested, encouraged to say that, dear, somebody died, and we believe he or she may have gone to heaven. And of course, somebody believes something else. But that's what we believe.
Yeah, I found that to be very successful with my children. It's that sense of like, people believe different things, and you know, this is what I believe, and I think that's where your idea of the drawing is lovely, Laura, I guess it's that piece. I wanted to just make that point of separating out the sort of belief, faith, imagination from you know, making sure the child does understand what death is, you know, that the heart has stopped beating, that they won't be coming back as such in physical form, at least. I'm glad. I want to get to more of the audience's questions, because there's lots going on. Any recommendations for dealing with anticipatory grief, such as speaking to children about terminal or incurable illness and palliative care? Does anyone have any experience of this? Are we being polite, or is the answer no?
Our charity do support individuals in terminal stage, pre-bereavement, we call them. And we do encourage the adults to host that conversation as soon as you can, when you are ready. And because that's a very limited time, and you would still wish, hopefully you could still make sense, encourage the children to make sense of what's going to happen. And maybe you could still use this time to make more memories. And we have come across parents who are very creative, able to create a lot of materials for later days. And of course, there's you can never prepare that. When it actually happens, when the time is up, it will still hit the children, the adults, because this is a loved person, so special, and that's why you feel the hurt. But you do what you can, and for the person at the end of the life stage, they left what they could as well. So that's also a very, very important conversation, and I almost feel that's an urge to do something as well. I would say break the news, have that honest, open conversation, and encourage everybody, all parties, to say, what shall we do? Any ideas, and be creative. And of course, if we need to, get professional support as well.
Yeah. Lovely. And I think that connects so well with what Laura's saying too. What I'm thinking is, I don't know if you guys see it like this, that probably more and more we want, like, what can I do now practically to sort of like make sure that this is as least messy and painful as possible? And I feel like we're speaking to both sides, which is like, actually, there are things you can do, and there are ways to kind of clear the way, and there are ways to prepare. And also, it's meant to be very, very painful and very, very hard. And it's not about like, well, we've done all the work and we've ticked all the boxes, so now, there's no need to cry. It's both things. Lovely. Let me move on. What ongoing support would you advise for children who, following a death, are then frightened about others dying, their parents or themselves? So we've spoken a little bit about this, but Danielle, do you feel like?
Yes, that's really important. Sometimes children aren't quite ready at first, but it's being sensitive to when they're ready. But like my daughter, play therapy was really effective with her. And I noticed like she had her dolly, and she was holding her dolly, and then she was cuddling it. And I said, how is Dolly? Dolly's sad. Oh dear, why is Dolly sad? Dolly's sad because her daddy's not here. Oh, where is her daddy? Her daddy died. And she doesn't know when she'll see him again, or if she'll see him again. And so she's 2.5, coming 3, and this is her processing. And so we're having a discussion. So when she was a bit older and ready, then in came the play therapy, and it did wonders for them. But that's a fantastic avenue to explore, because it gives children that creativity. They can paint, they can draw, they can mold with clay, and it's amazing what comes out of them when they are doing this. And it's just, sometimes they don't even realize what they're doing. They're just coloring, and then suddenly there it is. I used to see the pictures of us that they would draw of our family, and then Daddy was in a distance, and he had wings. So, or there was a tombstone, because Daddy's stone, as they called it, and they were so small. So it is finding those avenues like that. And the books are fantastic, but the professional support is fantastic. And schools, make sure the schools are talked to. It's really important that you have that conversation with the school, with the teachers, so that they are aware, and it avoids discomfort on both sides. I mean, it's difficult anyway, but it eliminates some of the potential potholes, I guess, so that you could hit minefields with a small child. That's helpful for small children and older, because there's a question here which I think touches on that, which I'm not asking this anew, I'm just sort of feeding this into this part of the conversation. Well, there's 2 questions. One is about advice for approaching the topic with children who are actively scared of death, especially in a non-parental relationship, such as in school. And then we have another question. There's been a death in the class I teach in primary school, and the kids are all struggling. How can I best support them? And I think this is a really nice, and I think we have quite a lot of people from education in the audience. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that. It strikes me that, we don't right now provide a lot of resources for people who work in education to handle this topic, which is interesting because it must happen all the time. I mean, there must be so many grieving children in school. We just did a blog at Poppies with Project Eileen, this amazing organization that are
creatively working with teenagers to talk about grief and death and dying in schools. And in the blog, there was this really interesting anecdote of working with these teenagers who only through doing the work with Project Eileen did they start talking about a child who died in the school a couple of years before, that they just hadn't been given the language to talk to each other about. But the project a few years later had opened this conversation up. So I wonder if we could talk a little bit about that, like how can we support teachers and people in education to, because I think you've described that really well, that, you know, as parents or as grandparents or as carers or as people who love kids and teens, but we want to make sure that's carried on in school as well.
Yeah. Can I come in?
Go, Laura.
I don't know why I've asked, because I don't have the answer, but what I was going to
None of us
say-
have the answers. We're just chatting. You go, Laura.
Okay. I just think it's really, yeah, what Danielle said, you know, about teachers, because yes, we have it covered at home, but what happens at school? Who is there to support the teachers when a child within, you know, the classroom passes away? And I think as well, you know, what activities, how do we speak to the children? I think, again, that it comes down to different ways of expression. So if you were to take a group and say, right, we want you to construct a poem about the child, Tommy, and then we want this group to you know, to create some artwork for this child, and then, you know, different ways that we can express ourselves, and then we come together and then we present those articles that have been created. I think that would be so much more effective than having a teacher stand up in assembly and say, you know, this is what's happened, and if you want some help and support, then you can come and find us later. No, we need to jump in. We need to be in with them. You know, we need to be speaking about it. And, well, what do you think she would have liked? And what do you think she would have been thinking at that time? And what were your last conversations with her? You know, what colours did she like? And what music was she into? What did she like on television? Regardless of the age, there will always be something that we can ask to just bring up the emotions, because we want the tears. We want the sadness. We want the sorrow. We need to see it. Again, instead of it being trapped within, because then it's going to come out in the future. And none of us can afford that. So if anything, make it easier for yourself. Have those conversations, and then the teachers need to come together and have a special meeting where they then speak about the child that has passed away and just support each other. Everybody has an experience with death, and often the death is the trigger to everybody else's outpouring. So let's come together and have these conversations.
Gorgeous. Yeah.
Too passionate, so I'm just
Danielle and Pia, do you have, because we do have all these people, I think, in the audience who are in education. So if we could talk a little more about this, if you had more to say, or we can move on if we feel like we've covered it.
No, I think that's good. You know, I just remember that initial meeting that I had with, 'cause my daughter literally started her first day of primary school was the week after my husband's funeral. And I had mixed emotions about that, but she really wanted to go and tried to make it special. But meeting with her teacher and headmaster at the time, and they were very flexible. They were like, look, if you're late for school, because they knew I was now under all this pressure, we'll not penalize her. We will, you know, and they were just very flexible with everything. And I think they were more aware. So when Father's Day came around, they weren't making something in class for Father's Day. They were just doing a normal craft. She goes, we're just not going to do that this year. And it was being sensitive to that. Because I have talked to people where their children were like told, oh, we'll just make it for another adult, or make it for your grandfather, or make it. And just like thought that were being helpful, but actually the child's going, I don't want to. So I think it's being sensitive around those times as well. But I think, yeah, I think it's just having those conversations.
So helpful.
Can I just pop in again? Just
Yeah.
another thing. What I often find is that there are some people who can just deal with the grief and that's it. But just as Danielle has said, we have to think about the knock-on effects and the secondary losses. And those might not be easily recognised in the educational sphere. You know, the parent might now be suffering from financial deprivation, let's say, because a second wage is gone. So if the child does come to school in trainers, or maybe a bit scruffy, or, you know, something, just be aware that actually there was a death a little while ago. Let's check in. How's the family coping? You know, if the child is late, yeah, don't sanction them. What's going on? Let's talk about it. There are, you know, am I still a big sister because my little brother's gone? You know, little questions like that. Who am I? Identity. Death throws it all up. So let's talk about all of it, and don't just kind of fob it off and say, well, you know, they've gone, full stop, because it then affects the rest of their lives.
And we know, don't we, that, or I definitely know as the funeral director, how common people's experience that they feel like they're given a lot of support and they're given a lot of slack, sort of like from the death until the day of the funeral. And then and that's when like all the lasagna arrives and like all the support and all the babysitting, and then it just evaporates because everyone's like, oh, that's done, you know. And again, not intentionally, of course, but of course it's the next year and years that the family or the person is having to build themselves back together. So I also really like that idea of whether it's Father's Day coming or just, you know, a secondary loss, something comes up, that it's present enough in your mind that you can make the space to remember that this person is going through something tough. I think we have room for one more go on, Pia, just a quick one.
Sorry, I'm just going to add on to that is I think from when I in my job, what I learned is do not assume, and children could tell you what they would like to do or what they prefer. For example, if let's say Father's Day, Mother's Day card, they may still want to, or maybe they don't want to. Maybe they want to do it in the class or maybe in a different room. And also do not assume that the child may be sad. It's that's complicated when it comes to relationship. And also don't forget, some kids may have additional needs. They may react to an incident very differently, and maybe they're sad but they couldn't express, or there's a delay in understanding. So again, it's going back to how well you know this child. Maybe just ask them and then act on that.
Gorgeous. I'm so glad you squeezed that in. That was like gold dust. One last question, and we're going to keep it short because I really want to make sure we do the last bits and end solidly on time. There's a couple of questions that have come up. John has asked this question, but it relates to another question too, basically about children at funerals. It feels really important to bring this in. So John's question: being a foster carer, a child in my care was told his dad had died a few months ago. The child, who I still care for, was upset he couldn't say goodbye at the funeral as this had already happened. How do you handle this? And then related to that, Natalie asks, how can we normalize children's attendance at funerals of loved ones? And I might just throw in my experience of this, that I meet a lot of people who didn't get to go to their grandparents' funeral, sometimes like 60 years ago. And it's like a wound that is just right there. You know, it's like, it's as if it happened yesterday. There's a sense, my experience is there's a sense of being excluded from some hugely important rite of passage. There can be a sense of like not being certain the person died because I wasn't there. I didn't see the coffin. I wonder if you guys have thoughts on this. I think we're probably all on the same page about whether children should come to funerals or not. But if you have thoughts, Laura, I wonder if you have some good experience of this as a celebrant.
Yes, with regards to John's situation, have a funeral. Just because that the child wasn't able to attend that funeral, it doesn't mean that you can't have your own service. It doesn't mean that you can't do something to remember Dad in your own way. So, I think that there's this idea that funeral services are, you can just have one. No, you can have many. You can express yourself in as many different ways as you like. And, journaling, get the child to start writing letters to mum, dad, grand, brother, sister, friends. And again, just have these little, create traditions, create ritual. We can do that. Again, use the imagination and let's think, pardon the pun, outside of the box. Let's do this together. We work together, and then we can also get people from the community who may also have gifts that we need at that time. So
It's so gorgeous. And I've had a personal experience of that too, that, you know, rituals can be held 50 years later, and they can do much of the healing work. It's like, it's done. We did it. I needed that. Now I've done it. And I'm going to have to begin to bring us to a close. I don't want to miss the chance to ask you all one last question, and I'm going to ask you to sort of try and answer it briefly, because I know we could talk about this all night. But before we go, can you each share one final thought for the audience? What is the one thing you want to leave people with tonight? It could be a resource, it could be a thought, it could be anything that feels like a priority to communicate. And if you could keep it brief, I'd be very, very grateful. Danielle, would you like to start?
I would say let children be children. And I think that's from the funeral. My children were there and they were told, you know, my son, 6 years old and with additional needs, was told he was now the man of the house. It was his responsibility. He had to look after his mummy. And I went, no. And I stopped it there. He's a child. He needs to be a child. Don't put grown-up expectations on children. And it's hard enough to navigate it, especially when you're that young.
Mega. Thank you. I totally agree. Well done, you. Laura?
I would say just remember that death is a natural transition and that we need to be speaking about it. I've created books, an end-of-life guide called My Life's Tapestry, that helps us to have these conversations, and it helps us to remember our lives. It's a gift for the future generations. And Tapestries of Grief helps us to understand or overstand what grief is, the causes of it, and why it's so necessary, because it is necessary to grieve. So you can find me at dippism.com, and I'm happy to speak to anybody about any experiences that you've had or what we've spoken about this evening.
Yeah, and I'd encourage you all to go and find these wonderful people after tonight or tomorrow morning, because they're all doing incredible work. Pia?
I think, first of all, well done for everybody who attends. You're already one step ahead because you're thinking, you're preparing, and that shows you care and you love, and that's what's important. Not all children or adults, children, bereaved individuals need professional support. The immediate around environment, the people around them, does most of the job. And you've been thinking and preparing. That's important. Just reassure them. That's what they need. Somebody to go to, somewhere they feel safe.
Gorgeous. Lovely. Thank you, Pia. We are now just going to share a poll. So you're going to see a little poll pop up on your screen. If you could just take part in it, that would be super helpful for us. Let us know what you thought of tonight. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Thank you, Laura and Danielle and Pia. Your perspectives have been insightful and warm and encouraging. I am so personally grateful for the work that you're doing in the world and the impact you're having. So please carry on doing it. Thank you so much to everyone who's come here tonight. I hope you feel this has been confidence boosting and compassionate, and at least a good start. There are many more resources on the Poppies website, so poppiesfunerals.co.uk, to support conversations, particularly our Talking Death blog. We've interviewed all three of these amazing women on the blog, so go and find the blogs. Check us out on social media at Poppies Funerals, or come and visit us at Poppies in Lambeth Cemetery in Tooting. We're going to be emailing you all tomorrow with a recording of the event, with some further resources, and the recording will be on Poppies social media channels as well. So please do share with anyone who you think might find it useful. I'm so thrilled with myself for ending on time. Thought that was never going to happen. Thank you all so much, and good night.